Staying with the coronavirus, South African researchers have provided the first tentative answers as to how well current vaccines may protect us against this new Omicron variant. Now, they've found that Omicron is significantly better at evading virus-fighting antibodies produced by the Pfizer vaccine than previous strains. But the findings suggest that booster shots could help increase protection. For more on this, we're joined by the Africa Health Research Institute's director, Professor Willem Hanekom. Professor Hanekom, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. So what exactly do we mean when we say Omicron is able to evade the vaccine response?
So we're not entirely sure at the moment whether that would hold true, actually. But first of all, there were predictions when we learned about the genetic makeup of this virus. All the changes or mutations of this virus predict that some parts of the immune response that's supposed to protect us after infection or after vaccination would not work anymore. But now, in our labs at the Africa Health Research Institute, Professor Alex Siegel did some studies where he looked at whether this virus will actually evade the antibodies that were caused by previous vaccination with the Pfizer vaccine. So he took blood from people who had the Pfizer vaccine, and he looked at whether those antibodies could actually control this virus in a test tube, and it could still control it. And that's important to know. It's just that the control was much less than the control was against other control viruses that he used, which were from earlier in the epidemic. So it looks as if there's some resistance or evasion of the immune response induced by the vaccines. I have to emphasize that these are laboratory data, and that's extraordinarily important. Ultimately, what we are looking for are the data in the field from big studies of vaccine effectiveness. Now, the NICD and the MRC are already doing those studies, and we should have results within the next week or two.
And I suppose on that point then, Doctor, because from these lab studies, this was taken, I think, from a sample of about 12 people or so. You say we need a broader, large-scale, shall we say, assessment of the results for vaccine efficacy. And I would imagine, given the early days of the spread of Omicron, it may still be too premature to get a fully conclusive picture.
I absolutely agree. And, you know, in terms of the lab results, which are very important because we learn about the virus all the time, and this is going to influence new treatments or new vaccination approaches. There's going to be lab results that are going to come from all over the world now. It's just that Alex Siegel and his group were the first to actually report this. And they're obviously going to expand their studies now to larger numbers and also look at the J&J vaccine. But we anticipate that the J&J vaccine's immune response will also be evaded to some extent by this virus. I want to emphasize again that this does not mean the vaccines are not going to protect. The vaccines induce or cause much broader immunity than just antibodies. And so that immunity also contributes to protection. So vaccinologists believe that the vaccines are still going to protect against severe disease and death. And therefore, if you want to protect yourself against Omicron today, go and get vaccinated. That's the best thing that you could possibly do.
Pfizer and BioNTech have responded to some of the questions raised based on this early study, it must be said, in South Africa, saying that they, in fact, have learned that a third dose on top of the previous two, which are the standard rollout of that vaccine, would give us enough protection that is equivalent or similar to the two-dose regimen against the previous variants. So as things stand, would all of this be resolved through a booster?
We hope so. I've seen those results. They look very encouraging. I'm sure many other people are going to look at this too. As you know, there are various countries in the world that are already giving booster dosages, like the United States and the UK. And as you know, the Omicron epidemic is just, or variant is just emerging in the UK. And so we'll ultimately gain more experience. It seems to us that in terms of the antibody response after vaccines, that more is better. So that if you have a booster shot, you're likely to be better protected.
And in the last, 30 minutes or so before we came to air, we got a statement from the South African Medical Research, not the Health Medical Research Council, but the regulator for medicines in the country, said that they've now approved a third dose of the Pfizer shot. Should government do that immediately or await more data on how to do it?
I think the government needs to be very careful here. So they've been very careful in focusing first on getting as many persons vaccinated as possible, and importantly, those persons that are at risk of more severe disease, such as the elderly or people who have comorbidities such as lung disease or heart disease or severe HIV infection. So I think the approach of the government has been very rational, and we need to increase those numbers dramatically first. That is important. The government has already come out, Department of Health has already come out with recommendations of booster dosages for some groups of people. Those are people with immune compromise or weakened immune systems due to drugs they are on or advanced HIV infection, etc. So some groups that already are eligible for boost vaccination, but we anticipate based on WHO recommendations that we think are going to come out very soon, that the boost vaccinations will soon be rolled out to people at risk of more severe disease. Again, those are the people who are elderly or who have comorbidities such as lung disease or heart disease.
And Prof, Pfizer also said today that they are already in the process of working on an Omicron-specific vaccine, which they would expect to have out by March 2022, so in the first quarter of next year. Do you think we're likely to see more of that with the variants where we constantly have to develop new ones? Or is it as simple as we were told at the beginning, where you just tweak slightly what's already available?
Yeah, we'll have to see and watch the space. The reason is after each of the previous variants emerging, like Beta and Delta in South Africa, there were also such talk about immediately adapting the vaccines for the variants. And that can be done. But it's turned out that the vaccines are actually good enough, so they may also actually be good enough for Omicron to protect us against severe disease and death in this situation. So vaccine development is not that simple. You can tweak things, but to take it through the entire process is a huge effort. So that's a very important and difficult decision to be made, and I think lots of people globally are talking about that.
Professor Willem Hanekom, good to speak to you, Director of the Africa Health Research Institute, speaking to us about very early stage research they've done as far as the efficacy of the Pfizer shot against the Omicron